Chair, your meeting is now live.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank everybody for coming today to this Governance and Audit and Standards Committee meeting. My name is Leo Madden and I'm the chair of this committee. And we're meeting virtually. I have to read this out. We are meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic. For the purposes of this meeting, the City Solicitor has advised that pursuant to Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the local authorities' Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regulations 2020 number 392. The suggestion here that we turn the microphones off when you're not speaking, but I'm going to leave that down to people themselves because you can see the difficulty even I'm having. But could I now ask the members who are here to introduce themselves, and I'll call you, if I may, in alphabetical order. So, Councillor Simon Bosher.
Good afternoon, Chair. Councillor Simon Bosher, Conservative Councillor for Drayton and Farlington.
Thank you. Councillor John Ferret.
Good afternoon, Chair. Councillor John Ferret, Independent Councillor for Paulsgrove.
Thank you. Councillor Judith Smythe.
Councillor Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward, present, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Neil Young.
Chair, Councillor Neil Young's having difficulty joining the meeting. He's going to try to, but he hasn't been able to do so at the moment.
Okay. Okay.
Chair, are we quorate?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's 2 members, is it?
It's 2.
Yeah. Yeah, we're okay. The Lib Dems are one short at this meeting because, as you've probably seen, Councillor Chris Atwell has become a cabinet member for resources, and therefore we can't elect or appoint anybody until the next full council meeting to this committee. Indeed, the other committees or panels that he's come off. I'm going to ask officers to introduce themselves, if that's okay. So I'm going to call the external auditors first. Helen Thompson.
Hello, Chair. It's David White, the External Audit Manager from Ernst & Young. Helen Thompson is unable to attend this afternoon.
Thank God for that. I was worried about the voice. Okay. Good afternoon, David.
Hi.
Okay. And I'll call the other officers I have. You've spoken to Charlotte already. Charlotte Smith.
Good afternoon, Chair. Charlotte Smith, Assistant Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you very much. Peter Bolf.
Good afternoon, Leo. Peter Bolf, Solicitor, here in present, if not in mind.
Thank you. John Thomas.
Hello, everyone. I'm Complaints Manager for Social Care and the Clinical Commissioning Group.
Okay, thank you. Karen Fitzgerald.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Compliance Officer.
Sorry?
Karen Fitzgerald, Corporate Complaint.
Oh, Corporate Officer. Okay, thank you. Michael Lloyd.
Hello, Chair. I'm here, Finance Manager, Technical and Financial Planning.
Thank you. Julian Pike.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. Deputy Director of Finance.
Thank you. Lizzie Goodwin.
Good afternoon, Chair. Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Audit.
Okay, thank you. Paul Somerset.
He is not present for this meeting, Chair. Sends his apologies.
Okay, thank you. Richard Locke.
Good afternoon, Chair. Richard Locke, Acting Procurement Manager.
Thank you. And Vicky Plitus.
Vicky Plitus, present, Chair, Democratic Services.
Okay, thanks very much. Have we any apologies then? Or that we've Councillor Young, who's trying to get into the meeting, but that's it, isn't it? Vicky?
That's correct. That's correct, Chair, yes.
Okay. Any declarations of interest? Unless I hear somebody shout at me, I'll take it that there aren't any. Can we, the minutes of the, I think we can do the minutes of the 3rd of March now, can't we? Because Councillor Ferret's here.
Yes, but Councillor Ferret wasn't there at the March.
Oh, right, you're right.
Unfortunately, because Councillor Young hasn't managed to get in yet, we can't do the minutes for the 3rd, but we can do the minutes for the 24th.
Well, we'll do that anyway and see what happens. Okay. So we could go to the minutes of the 24th of July, which is page 17. I'll go through them for accuracy and matters right, and that's okay. Page 17. Page 18. Page 19. Page 20. Page 21. Page 22. Page 23. Are they okay, members? Happy for me to sign those sometime in the future as a through a record? Is that okay? Yes, I'll take that as a yes.
Three.
Thank you. We now go on to item 6, which is the corporate complaints. And Charlotte, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for moving the agenda around for us. I really appreciate it. So I'm responsible for corporate complaints. I've been joined by John Thompson, who is Social Care Complaints Manager, and by Karen, who is our Corporate Complaints Officer. Purpose of the report is to bring information around corporate and ombudsman complaints to the attention of the committee. We provide this information annually following the publication of the Ombudsman's annual report. And I think it's important to say, and we say this every time really, that it would be preferable if our services were all perfect, and there would never be any need for people to complain. But in reality, we know the council won't always get it right, and so complaints are welcomed as an opportunity to put things right and to improve, our services for the customers that we work for. Just in terms of a few headlines, so in terms of corporate complaints, we've seen a reduction in the overall complaints managed through the system this year compared to last year. It's impossible to say for certain why, but we have put a significant amount of work into improving customer service and addressing customer issues at the first point of contact. And we hope that this is the reason why we are receiving fewer formal complaints. I think it's really important to note the work that's been done by Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services in this respect. Their complaints have fallen significantly from 276 to 188, and they have done concerted work in their directorate to improve that customer service, and I think that's really reaping benefits for them. The number of stage 1 complaints we've managed within the complaint policy timelines has increased to 70%. From 66% last year, so that's showing benefit to our work to try and improve that. In terms of stage 2 complaints, we managed 71% within the time frame, which again is an improvement on last year. When we move to stage 3, we've got less good performance in that area, and we've got a significant drop in our adherence to the timescales. Only 22% managed within the 20 working days compared with 76% last year. So we're aware that this is an area where we've got an issue that we need to work on. Just a little bit of a sort of explanation. Stage 3 complaints, they are the final stage in the process for the council. By that point, complaints that are escalated to stage 3 are usually fairly complex. They often require additional information from the customer, and that can result in delays while we wait for the customer to respond or to be available for meetings, those kind of things. We also often need professional input from officers that can be quite technical or specialist, and then we sort of experience delays around capacity or even just availability of those specialists. Nonetheless, the timelines and the level that we're at is not acceptable to us, and we're reviewing stage 3 complaints this year to identify any particular issues and try and make improvements to that timeline. Moving on then to local government social care ombudsman complaints. The number of complaints and inquiries referred to the ombudsman in relation to Portsmouth City Council has reduced from 45 to 35. We hope that although we haven't been meeting the timelines on our stage 3 complaints, this perhaps indicates that more customers are satisfied at the outcome of our process, and so fewer have felt the need to refer us to the ombudsman. Also, the number of upheld complaints has reduced from 8 to 6, and the number of complaints referred and upheld compares favourably to other local authorities of similar level. And there's a table at section 6 in the report for comparison if you're In terms of the 6 upheld complaints, I've tried to reflect the committee's feedback from last time that you would like more detail in relation to the complaints that are upheld, and I hope that the amount of detail we've provided this time is more what you're looking for. There are only 6, but I've provided also the links to the publicly available full case information, which the LGO publishes on their website. So that may be of use to the committee, but also to any member of the public reading the reports as well. Of the 6, there's a spread. There's not one particular area that has sort of been particularly high in terms of LGO complaints. There's one for children's social care, which is an issue relating to ongoing support for a care leaver continuing in education. There were 2 for adult social care, but different areas, one relating to domiciliary care through a care agency, and another relating to support provided by a care agency for a service user with learning disabilities. There was one relating to corporate services, which was around a customer having issues accessing services as a result of a disability, including being unable to make a complaint, one we have very much taken on board. Then there were 2 relating to housing. So one which related to the handling of a complaint associated with a homelessness application, and then another relating to circumstances around administration of a vulnerable persons grant, which I think if you've read the detail of that one, the complaint was that the council had made things slightly confused for the customer by trying to help too much in that situation. So I think there was acknowledgement from the Ombudsman there that we tried to do the right thing, but in doing so had slightly made things unclear as to where our responsibility lay. In terms of learning, the upheld complaints have resulted, particularly this year, in a new reasonable adjustments policy for the organisation, to ensure that the council's proactively seeking to understand whether customers require those reasonable adjustments as a result of disabilities. And that policy has been communicated through the organisation and included in our mandatory equality and diversity training. So some real learning from a couple of those complaints, one in particular, resulting in some significant changes in that area. There's also been changes around the council reminding care providers about the need to maintain adequate records, and changes to processes around support plans being appropriately discussed with social workers and service users and their families. So changes have been and improvements being made as a result of complaints. I think overall numbers have reduced, which I think is positive in that we're resolving more customer inquiries at the first point of contact, and the stage 1 and 2 timelines are continuing to improve. But there is still work for us to do around the management of stage 3 complaints, and we'll be looking to address that this year. That's all from me. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Well, thank you very much, Charlotte. Could I say I shall be consistent and say that as an elected member, I welcome and always welcome complaints anyway, and particularly if we can learn from them, which we've been doing here. And I was interested in 5.2 in the report, where the Ombudsman is keen to point out that a high number of complaints do not necessarily mean a council is performing poorly, which we've said all along, or I've said along. It may indicate an authority that welcomes and encourages feedback, and I think we've been doing that as long as I've been around. So I also read the individual reports there, and I read them with interest. I have no comment on them itself, but I do say welcome that, and I want to thank you, Charlotte, for the report. Any questions, members? I don't know how I'm going to see you. Jump in, members.
Chair,
please.
Just a quick one. On page 56, there's 2 tables, and I can see you've changed the database. This is the corporate complaints.
Yes.
It's impossible for us to compare those, of course. Can you reassure me that we'll have figures that we can compare next year? And second of all, are there any things that I might have missed because I can't compare properly along those 2 tables? You've talked about improvements in housing, although that includes other services alongside. I wondered if there's anything we might have missed of an exceptional nature, particularly one where we might need some action because those 2 tables are different. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smythe. Yes, we have, because we've replaced the corporate complaints database within then the changeover happened in the middle of that year. It does make the figures around the number of complaints by directorate difficult to compare. However, the complaints across the board have decreased So I think every service area has seen a reduction in the number of stage 1 complaints. And as is noted for housing management, they've seen a really significant reduction. I don't think there isn't anything else. There isn't anything that I think that you would be missing as a result of the two tables being difficult to compare, if that makes sense. The difficulty is that directorates changed as a result of the service reviews, and as a result of that, some areas are now within different directorates, and that makes the complaints numbers difficult to compare. But just to reassure, next year we will have all of our figures from our new Respond complaints database. That will make it much easier for us to report on corporate complaints. It's just taking a bit of a time lag because this is so far back now. By the time we bring them to the committee, they're quite old. I hope that reassures.
Thank you for that reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Just jump in.
Yeah, Chair.
Please.
It's John. If you click on participants, Chair, then you'll see if colleagues raise their hands, you should have a sidebar there that will give you the names, and you can raise your hand through that. Right, so Charlotte, I was going to make the same point as Leo on 5.2, but also wondered if we'd had any external assessment of our procedures or processes for people raising complaints. You know, has anyone validated our view or our belief that we have a system there that's easy for people to access?
So thank you, Councillor Ferret. Our corporate complaints process, which is set out in the policy, was validated and approved by the Ombudsman. So when we reviewed the policy in 2018, we took it to the Ombudsman to make sure that they consider our process to be satisfactory and in line with what's done by other organisations. We're actually relatively unusual within local authorities now in having a 3-stage complaint process. Majority of local authorities only have 2 stages. So we are extremely robust in the number of opportunities that we give complainants to have their complaints reviewed. I think the Ombudsman complaint that we had, which corporate complaints were involved in, around making sure that we are asking customers proactively if they need reasonable adjustments, was something that we've learned from very much this year. And as I've noted, we have developed the reasonable adjustments policy as a result of that. I think that's been useful to the organisation in highlighting for us where we need to take additional steps to make sure those customers who have additional needs or need additional, or who need us to make changes to the way that we do things to enable them to access our services, are being actually proactively asked the questions. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks for that, Charlotte. I did have another point to make on the report, if that's okay, Chair, and that was that's relating to the length of time that some complaints take to complete, not least if they end up with the Ombudsman. And both Peter and Leo will be aware of a particular case that has taken a number of years, probably still hasn't been resolved entirely to the satisfaction of the complainant, but certainly my concerns around that is how long it took for the council to deal with that. And maybe if it had been dealt with more speedily, then it wouldn't have taken quite so long if the council had addressed it, and wouldn't have caused as much grief to the individual as it did because of the protracted process. So my point is, with those cases, I'm assuming we do a review of how we've handled those. And if you can confirm that, and the sort of process we have in place for cases that are complicated and take a long time.
We don't have a standard review of all stage 3 complaints that don't meet the timescales, but we will be doing a review of all of the stage 3s that have not met the timescales, so that we can learn from each individual complaint why things have taken a long time and what we're intending to do. And we would have done this previously, but we've been slightly interrupted by coronavirus this year, is to do a proper review to understand whether there are any particular patterns around complaints exceeding the timescales, and then we can work, and if they are coming from any particular areas, so that we can work with those areas to try and address things when they do exceed the timescales. So yes, I entirely take your point. This is an area where we need to improve, and we will be looking to review each individual complaint that exceeds to make sure that we're learning each time and trying to make those changes to improve that.
So if we as councillors are dissatisfied with how the council are dealing with the complaint and we feel it's not being progressed as speedily as it should be, who do we go? Should we go through you in terms of raising those concerns and asking for it to be addressed?
Absolutely. I'm responsible for corporate complaints, and if you've got any issues at all or any concerns about the way a complaint is being handled, then please bring them to me and we'll make sure that's addressed.
Similarly, obviously for social care, we have a slightly different process. So obviously the same way, I don't know which complaints you're referring to, Councillor, but if it's a social care complaint, you could obviously contact us, the complaints manager. I job share with Natalie Beckett.
Yeah, it did. Like I say, this was a long. The specific complaint I referred to earlier was a long-standing one. Did involve social care, but I'm really looking now at sort of if I'd known then about, maybe I should have, Charlotte. Maybe I should have been pointed in your direction by the people I was dealing with. There was a lot of delays within that at points which, on reflection, I would have been coming to you saying, look, this really does need to be accelerated. But it's helpful to know that now.
Absolutely, always happy to. And if you're not sure whether a complaint should be us or social care, please come to us and we'll make sure that it's directed in the right direction.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And thank you for that ongoing training for me, John. I find participants and I find your little microphone on. Okay. I can't see any others though. Any other points for any other members? Vicky, I take it that Councillor Young hasn't joined us yet.
No, Chair, Councillor Young hasn't joined. I'll let you know if he does.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, any other? So, are you happy to accept this? Oh, sorry, Lizzie.
Sorry, Councillor. I wanted to also pick up on Councillor Ferret's question that beyond what Charlotte has already explained in relation to the complaints process, that would also be subject to audit at any given time. And I think historically, Charlotte, we have looked at it, and historically, I think it was a reasonable audit result that came out the back, but that would be subject, as would any activity, perhaps during a particular cycle for us to look at it. So again, if there's concerns that are persistent and keep reoccurring, you can always put it on the table of the auditors.
Okay, John. Yeah, lots of angles. Well done. Thank you. Okay, members, can we note that report? Okay, so thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Can we now move on to item 4? I just noticed, Julian, that lots of the bits of item 4 are also in item 5. Now, I have to say the diagrams, I think, in item 5 are better than diagrams in item 4. So perhaps you might want to put the better ones in there. Well, I take it you're going to do it separately anyway, Julian. So I'll call on item 4, which is Treasury Management. Sorry, just for the public, which is Treasury Management Outturn Report for 2019-2020.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
The report informs members of Treasury Management activity during 2019-20 and the Treasury Management position at 31st of July. The report outlines borrowing activity and the adverse effect COVID has had on the corporate bond market at the end of 2019-20, but goes on to explain that the market's recovered by the end of the first quarter 2020. Members are asked to note the Treasury Management indicator, page 30.
We've lost you, Julian.
If Michael Lloyd, Sorry, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
And if the panel, if the board would like to either ask myself or Michael Lloyd any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, and that's on the whole report, Julian. Report number 4, yeah.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Okay. Could I just? I'll start off with a few. Could I? I don't know which paragraph. It's borrowing activity in Appendix A. Julian, okay. And it's about the PWLB, the Public Works borrowing. And I just wondered, the paragraph under the diagram says the Treasury intends to put a stop to local authorities borrowing money from the PWLB to purchase commercial property if the aim is solely to generate an income stream. Have we borrowed money from that source to do other than buy a commercial property?
Yes, that is correct, because we borrowed from that source to fund our commercial property portfolio.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah,
we've only ever borrowed from this from Public Works to buy commercial properties,
and also for the whole range of non-commercial council services.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think something that needs to be borne in mind is that the government hasn't yet provided a clear definition of commercial activity, and therefore we don't know what activities might fall within the government's definition.
Okay.
I mean, for example, we've got Dunsbury Farm and that sort of scheme.
Right. Okay. Could I move on to the page 33, and the underneath that diagram we talk about vessel, and you give details there. I think it's in my working out we lent or spent 3.4 million on vessel. Would that be correct?
That is correct in total over 2 financial years.
And then you say, but had it been a successful company, the returns would have been 1.2 in 1819 and 1.12 in 1819 and 1.16 in 1920.
That's correct, yes.
Will these sort of things be looked at, and perhaps you'll come to Michael in a minute, but would these sort of things be looked at by external audit? You know, the returns that would have been, Michael, do you know?
Well, they are considered by external audit insofar as they provide an opinion on the council's accounts. They also provide a value for money opinion. What the auditors choose to look at is really at their discretion.
Okay, thank you. That's me for the minute. A couple of others, but I'll yes, Judith, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates very much to your first question about our property portfolio, and just to follow up your question, do you think there's likely to be any sort of penalty, or are we going to have to move the borrowing for our property portfolio under Appendix A3? And a related question to that is I don't sort of see any details about any separate lines in this report or the next one about our property portfolio, and wonder if we should have a separate report on that at the next meeting, because I gather that in some cases property values have gone down, and also we may need to consider different sources of borrowing if we're going to have to move loans from the PWB to other sources. But I don't see enough reference in this report to that to know quite what's happening there.
Okay. The first thing to say is that the government have consulted on the PWLB borrowing arrangements. It's not yet firm exactly what the results of that consultation would be. What the government has said is that if we have commercial activity in our capital programme, we will be unable to access PWLB funds in that financial year. We don't know what definition of commercial activity the government's going to use. Sorry, I mean, if it's acquiring new commercial property, that's not so bad. If, for example, it were replacing a commercial property, replacing a roof on the commercial property, that would be more of a problem to us. The other thing to bear in mind is that the Public Works Loans Board isn't necessarily the council's sole source of borrowing. We can borrow from the private market, and also the Municipal Bonds Agency is being developed. In terms of reporting on the commercial property portfolio, the reports that we've got today are primarily treasury management and how the council borrows and invests its surplus cash, but the commercial property portfolio is included in the council's annual capital strategy report. Hope that answers the question.
To an extent. Do you think it likely that those as it were, commercial properties, and I appreciate they haven't yet been defined, that we would have to redeem the mortgages and start and find other lenders for that in the longer term? Do you think we can leave them where they are and for a while and without it penalising us?
The government has said that they're not going to penalise us for existing commercial activity. So the issue would arise if there was further commercial activity in the capital programme. So the existing portfolio is fine until we either want to replace a property or repair it.
Okay. I don't know what others think, but I think it might be worth having an examination of that maybe in 6 months' time so that we could see what effect COVID has had on that portfolio.
I mean, that is something which the property service would need to supply for report for.
Yes, I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, Vicky, could you take note of that and see if we can get a report in 6 months' time?
Yes,
No.
yes, Chair. I've noted.
From Property Services. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other points, members? Oh, John, I've got it now. You've got your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've just covered it by asking for the report, Leo, but only to say that I endorse what Councillor Smythe has said there in respect of, I think we do need some visibility on this. Things have clearly changed markedly from when we were discussing the property portfolio, 18 months ago, and I know there were reservations then that councillors and indeed the public had about the council pursuing that particular approach. We recognise, or some of us recognise, that there was little option given that the cuts that councils are facing, and we needed to find some way of raising revenue. But I mean, with hindsight, like a lot of things with hindsight at the moment, you probably wouldn't have entered into that. But that's why it's crucial that we do have some transparency and visibility on that. So totally endorse what Judith said.
Okay. Oh, Judith, please. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just say I think we might have lost Councillor Bosher.
Oh.
Oh, he's there. I can see him.
Oh,
I can see him.
Oh, I'm still here, Vicky.
Oh, you are there. Okay, sorry.
Wake up, Simon.
During the report, and I'm trying to find the exact reference, but my notes don't extend to it, you talk about impairment of investments. Could you explain what that might mean? Give some examples. Please.
Is that the next report?
Well, essentially, investments impaired if it's worth less than it was previously for whatever reason.
If I could interject there just for a moment, where we were referring to it then, I think, was when as at 31st of March, because of what was going on with COVID, the value of the purchase price of our bonds was below the market value that we originally paid for them. So the value of it was impaired down to what its current value is. But as the report says, that loss was quickly recovered when the market corrected itself, when liquidity returned, and those bond values have now gone above the value that we originally paid for them.
Thank you. That's what I thought, but thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
Okay, no other hands. Okay, members, the recommendation is that the actual prudential and treasury management indicators based on the unaudited accounts as shown in Appendix B be noted. An explanation of the prudential and treasury management indicators is contained in Appendix C. Is that okay? Is that agreed, members? Thank you very much. We can now move on to 5. Michael, Julian, whoever.
Yeah, okay. Well, this report is to inform members and wider community of the Council's Treasury Management position at the 30th of June this year, and report that there's been no breaches of the Treasury Management policy or limits. In terms of borrowing, we've borrowed £60 million at the Housing Revenue Account certainty rate for 50 years at an average rate of 1.17% in order to fund the Housing Revenue Account capital programme. The reasons why we did this were because the Public Works Loans Board rates have been very low, and also we were bearing in mind the government's consultation, which suggests that we may lose access to the Public Works Loans Board if our commercial activities fall foul of the government's definitions. In terms of investing, our investment portfolio of surplus cash invested at the 30th of June consisted of plain vanilla interest-bearing deposits of 374 million, which was the bulk of the portfolio. We had tradable structured interest-bearing deposits of 10 million and externally managed corporate bonds of 8 million, providing a total of 392 million. Our overall return was 2% on an annualized basis, but the important thing to bear in mind is that the majority of our investment income came from structured deposits and corporate bonds, which make up less than 5% of our investment portfolio. The reason for those returns was that liquidity came back into the market after the initial coronavirus emergency, and the value of investments recovered. Whilst this is very welcome, we don't expect that sort of increase in market value to be sustained. Happy to answer any questions.
I think we've lost Councillor Madden. Would it be possible for Councillor Bosher to step into the chair?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll go and find another chair to sit in at the moment. I think I might have one beside me. Any questions, members? Looks like you're doing a fabulous job there, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay. So the recommendations, it's noted. We have 2 there, 3.1 and 3.2. Are we in agreement with those, members?
Agreed.
A nod from Judith and a nod from John. Judith, you've got your hand up. Is that for a reason, or you just haven't switched it off? I think I got that. Yeah. Okay, members. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Right. We're moving on to, we've done agenda item 6. Right, bear with me, members, I'm just doing a scrolling exercise. So agenda item 7 is internal audit performance status. That sounds like it's probably you, Lizzie.
Sorry, Chair, I had you unplugged.
You had me unplugged.
Apologies. I had you unplugged because my
eat with these, which is not a technical audit problem, but anyway, moving on to the report, and thank you. So in relation to audit activities, we present to you obviously on a regular basis to say the work that we have undertaken. I think it's probably very appropriate to raise that whilst the last time I presented to committee, we had made plans to change the audit plan. That was to factor in, obviously, I think this might be a councillor joining us, perhaps. Sorry, on my screen I can say, see, waiting to admit. So yes, last time when I presented to you, we made some amendments. This was to factor in, obviously, COVID related issue. I think the most important thing really that we definitely have to factor in, and you'll see that I've presented in here a number of additional movements within our proposed work for 2021. Is where we have shifts in priority or where we have additional grants that are coming on the table. And the level of the grant work is significantly high. So I do want to talk you through, if that's okay, some of the amendments that have actually been made. So we are on plan, and if I can draw your attention to pages 73 onwards, because the others are just giving you background. So we have proposed work of 109 reviews. Of those 109 reviews, obviously it's broken down into areas of where we are doing follow-up work, where we're doing an additional follow-up, and where we are doing a full audit. And the second follow-up review are processes that we had agreed with you that where we carry out a natural follow-up and the actions haven't been implemented, we don't want to take them off the table. We're coming back and we're having a second revisit. So you can see we are progressing with our work. We were slightly behind, I think, at the beginning of the year. Apologies for the misspelling in September. But then going through on page 74, we usually narrate for you the additional pockets of work that we're involved in. There is an increased level of advice that we're being called upon to provide, which is appropriate because of the circumstances we're under. And we have an increase in special investigations where at the moment, I won't share with the committee, but I will present a paper at a later date to go over the additional work that we have been involved in. Page 75 is very relevant for you because it needs to show the audits that are being added to the plan and the audits that I am proposing to remove from the plan. And the only reason I am removing them are predominantly around the level of resource that we have available because of the additional work that we're being presented with. Moving on then to pages 78 onwards, I'm reporting the areas where we've undertaken a review and the general results within those activities. There are no areas of significant concern to bring to your attention at present. And so beyond that, you can see the grant verification on page 82 that we have at the moment undertaken, and we are closing down. There will be significant increase in the number of those that I'll need to present to you, because most of the additional pockets of money that has been given to local authorities all require some kind of verification. So in a nutshell, we are on target to complete the work that is scheduled. The work that was previously presented to you as our plan of activity, if there are any other amendments to that, I will include in the progress report on a regular basis. Section 4 should have narrated those areas that we've made amendments on, and there are no new areas of concern. So beyond that, Chair, I wasn't going to go into any other detail, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that arise.
Leo, are you back in the meeting?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna have to leave. We're having some domestic problems here. Could you take over?
Yeah, absolutely no problem.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Judith, you're waving your hand there.
Yes, thank you very much for a generally very encouraging report. I've got 3 or 4 related questions. The first is a general one that I was fearful when I first opened this report that your programme would have been greatly held back by COVID. But would I be right to assume that a lot of it actually does require some quiet consideration of paper evidence and some phone calls, rather than actually going into the backs of people's cupboards, which I seem to remember in the old days was part of how you did it? Would that be a correct assumption?
That would be a correct assumption. I have put in place a risk assessment so that every single audit we carry out the risk assessment with how we're going to obtain the evidence, because I need to balance we are independent and we need to trust the source of what we are pulling and how we're pulling it, but that is balanced with the caveat of there are some areas, for example schools, where we are totally flexing how we do this, and it may be that we pick up the records, they get quarantined for a while, and then we undertake.
So in general, my assumption is right, and I'm really pleased to see that. Did you suffer any lack of resources in your team to do this because of the COVID situation, in which case even better done?
We did. We, at the beginning, when critical services were maintained, we maintained all audit activities that didn't have a direct impact on an audit client or an auditee. So there's an awful lot that we attempt to always do behind the scenes. So because we have access to all of the systems and in theory records, those that were electronic and we could still complete, we did. You inevitably, obviously, always have contact with the client at the beginning, generally throughout. So there were some pockets that we stood down. There were also a number of my officers that were redeployed, and they were predominantly redeployed in 3 areas. It was either to undertake the business grant assessments in order to support revenues and benefits to process the claims that they had. It was in customer services, where I had an officer who had historic experience in that area, or I had an officer actually that was assigned to a care home and they were cleaning. So varied. We have to be a little careful with if an auditor, for example, not COVID related, but spent a period of time working in payroll, we then have a conflict with us being impartial and other officers need to be used. But we did hemorrhage a fair amount of time at the beginning time of the year, which is why the plan is slightly reduced to previous years, and it is being reviewed on a regular basis because of other changing needs within the organisation. And if we get hit again, I fully expect some of my officers to need to support other areas. I think the biggest hit is probably in the management time to support flexing within the organisation, arrangements within the governance framework, and that there was appropriate oversight in some of those pockets.
Thank you very much. I think we would probably want to make sure by the end of the year that we can have some statements from you about the actual impact of that, both in terms of the workload being reduced by postponing work that might have been done and any risks arising from that. But thank you. That is reassuring. I've feared that you might have had to take your eye off the ball in the year, which would have been a great mistake. There's a related question, which I don't want to anticipate the report we're going to be receiving about procurement, but I wonder if you could consider next year putting into your audit plan a bit of an audit of some of the decisions that we made, the financial decisions that we made during the beginning part of the pandemic, in your programme, because I think there will be lessons to learn from that, but also it would be very interesting for us in our role to be to try to get ourselves reassured and satisfied that we didn't really do anything wrong or potentially corrupt during that initial 6 months where everybody was, inventing the wheel and in a bit of a panic and feeling very vulnerable, I think, and where it might have been possible for decisions to be made that weren't wise. I'm not talking about political decision making here. I'm talking about decisions about spending money and decisions about maybe cutting corners in some way. But I think it's one of the things as a member of this committee I'd like to be able to be reassured on, perhaps at not our next meeting, but maybe a meeting in a year's time when we know whether we're through this or not.
Councillor Smythe, in the audit plan that I presented last time, there was an activity that says COVID-19 assurance reporting. And so that is for this financial year. And what that will cover is all of those pockets that so the procurement, any areas where it's not a grant verification, so we've already looked at it, but for example, we will need to look at where the laptops have been distributed and the controls that were around the laptops, where we have additional arrangements in place for home to school transport, and we may have offered perhaps to reimburse or to flex in some of our other methods or processes. We've either been involved or we intend to actually test. So where we have also agreed waivers around the procurement side or waivers around financial rules. Now, financial rules I'm involved in anyway, as is Jules or Chris. But we factored into a number of the audits, for example, when we usually annually look at payroll or we look at the purchase cards, and we have segregated out an element that is pre-COVID and an element that is COVID. So that report will come to you as a committee between now and the end of the financial year. So you will get it anyway, and Section 151 signed up and was quite content for us to be the sensory check across lots of the activities, as I said, that are falling outside of what we're already being pulled into, so that you can have the assurance.
Will your report include the brief summaries or a table of summaries of all the things you've had to check for the grants and so forth?
They will be contained as they are in this particular report, and the ones that we have signed off so far were on page 82. But the areas where, as I said, they are not a grant or they're not a full audit, however, we have undertaken checks. So one of the areas would be the discretionary grants. Another area would be there isn't a requirement for the infection control grant payment to be physically signed off by Chief Internal Auditor. However, we have undertaken a piece of work. The income loss compensation claim, which Jules and his team is currently working on, again, we are involved in doing a number of sense checks, and we will narrate that for you, probably in a summarized version, to say this is the activity, this is what we've looked at, and whether there were any particular concerns or issues kind of coming out of it.
Thank you. I mean, I think that I'm talking about something more than just compliance with grant conditions, because I think from my understanding of the grant conditions that were put out at the beginning of the pandemic, they were a bit sketchy sometimes anyway.
There are pockets that are quite sketchy or that have varied. Our work goes beyond the grant ones.
Thank you. I think I'd want to, I mean, my objective as a member of this committee would be able to say in a year's time, hand on heart, that I don't think that money was inappropriately spent or spent illegally or with corruption, and that we, you know, reckon we've managed the resources well, because I'm not sure that all local authorities will be able to do that at the end of this.
I think it feeds into our annual governance statement that we need to have assurances around. Sorry, I've got feedback now. Assurances around all of those amendments to any of our arrangements, which we had to go through in order to be able to provide the critical services. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That's very helpful. I don't think I've got anything. Let me just look at my notes. Yeah, that's the main thing. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
John, do you have any comments? I mean, I think Judith's covered most of what I was going to say. The only comment that I would make is that on page 81, it's really nice to see a school with green all the way through, because traditionally I think schools have usually got some problem somewhere, but congratulations to Brambles Infant School. It must be the first time I've seen a school that has got assurance at every single level.
Very good. Very good, they were. They should be held up as the beacon of good practice, I think.
Quite happy for that to be minuted. I don't know about you guys in that respect. I mean, praise where praise is due, I think. Okay, members. Trouble with a big page report. You have to scroll. Let me just scroll back. We're effectively being asked to note the audit performance and to note the highlighted areas of concern. Are we happy to note those two recommendations, members? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well done, Lizzie. Take care.
Thank you.
Right. We're now moving to agenda item. Bear with me. Agenda item 8. Consideration of political balance rules in relation to the constitution of subcommittees considering complaints against members. I think that's probably you, Peter.
Oh, it is. Thank you, Councillor Bosher. Every year we present this to GAS on the basis that we disapply the political balance rules to enable a wider field of members to be participating in the code of conduct process, and most particularly the initial filtering panel and membership panel to deal with the filters with me. I'm going to ask you to do what you do every year, which is to disapply them for the purpose of this, and it essentially means you look at it again in May 2021, having looked at it in previously last year, in the 26th of July 2019. So I'm going to ask you to do it again.
Do I have declared an interest because I've been on the initial filtering panel?
No.
No.
That qualifies you.
The initial filtering panel, Judith, is drawn from members of governance and audit anyway. So if that was the case, we'd all probably be declaring an interest on that basis. This is effectively so we don't end up with the largest party with all the seats, effectively initially filtering a member of their own party, shall we say, in that respect. I think Peter's right. It's something that we do every year to make sure that we can do it, and it probably helped Vicky enormously in the fact that it increased the size of the number of councillors that can say, "Sorry, Vicky, I can't do it." So she's making more phone calls.
Thank you, Simon.
Unless there's any questions, members, there is a recommendation there that the political balance rules are disapplied. Are we all in favour of that recommendation? Please indicate.
Yep, agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Bowser. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now move on to agenda item, is it 10? I think, yeah. I'm sort of jumping from 8.
So basically, Chair, you've got, you need to pass the exemption wording.
That's an agenda, that's item 9.
Yeah. That's right. So basically, you can pass the agenda wording, and you can, if members don't refer to anything in the exempt appendices, you can continue in open so that Richard Locke can present his report in open so that members of the public can know, get the general gist of what it is. And then once you're happy with that, once you want to go into asking details on the exempt appendices, this meeting closes and then we go into the private meeting.
Okay, members, are we, I'm minded to say that what we do is get Richard to present his report, and if you've got any questions that reply to the open report, we consider it. Unless anybody's got any questions specific to moving into exempt session, and then we will move into exempt session after Richard's presented his report, if that's okay with you. Okay, agenda item 10 then, procurement management information. Richard, the floor is yours, so to speak.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bowser. What I'll do is I'll take you through a quick flick through the report. As you said, anything that's related to this report I can answer now. Anything in the appendices we have to do on the exempt session. Let me just get that screen up. Okay, so as per the last report, it focuses upon 3 key areas of performance. So spend compliance, contract award via waiver, and contract management performance reporting. The last report we took was straight after the impact of COVID-19. The quarter that we're taking now can be kind of viewed as the first stages of recovery. So what I've done is try to kind of contrast those quarters as best I can. The first report, which deals with spend compliance, what it means here in terms of compliance is our compliance with the Transparency Code, which requires public bodies to have any contracts above £5,000 openly accessible on their contract registers, and we police that via reports from our finance system. And you'll see in the exempt appendices I provided you with those reports on this occasion. So from where we were last time, in terms of the raw compliance, which is where we run the report, and that's before we go in and double check any of the entries to see whether it is actually truly non-compliant or not, and before we go in and then ask for the contract managers to make sure they have actually uploaded the information onto the systems. We've managed to get the raw compliance up from 63%, I think it was, up to around about 80% or 64% to 80%. That's largely due to us having more ability to focus our resource onto procurement administration where we were previously, most of our resource was focused onto sourcing PPE, food, IT equipment, contract negotiation. So I think that's partly as we're moving from the response into recovery, we've managed to get that percentage up. Once we've applied the sense checking across that data, we're then at exactly the same compliance percentage we were last time, which is 97%. Running through the areas, so moving on to page 4, adult services have fallen below the 95% target. It's not of any significant concern because it comes to approximately £43,000. It's spread across quite a number of suppliers. So there's nothing there which is going to be significantly above our tender threshold or anywhere near the statutory thresholds, which for a social care is around about £650,000. Have to note though that doesn't include all the spend that goes via the contract system as well. Corporate services, okay, we've fallen below the target there, but again the spend is low at 42,767. So there's nothing there that's going to be causing any friction with our tender thresholds, but a bit there we might need to investigate further. Respective culture, again it's below the target. They're at 89%, but again it's a relatively low spend at 31,873, which is across a range of suppliers. There was one which had a distribution value in excess of 100k, which we need to get on the register, and that's in respect of the trust that runs the Guildhall, which we know has been through all of the various approvals required. Moving into housing, neighbourhood and building services. No significant concerns there. There's been some use of surveyors for valuations. We are engaging with the service about how we can formalise those contracts, but at the moment there's nothing there which is in breach of our contract procedurals or in breach of the wider regulations. Regeneration have fallen quite below, so there's a bit of work to engage there to make sure we've got more of the contracts that are showing up. There is one which is above the 100k, which is in respect of our interim manager at Lakeside. As the committee will be aware, when we purchased Lakeside, we had to get a number of elements in place very quickly, one of which being someone to effectively manage it on behalf of the council. That's been managed via a consultancy appointment. So I need to do some work with Tom Southall, who heads up that area, to get a waiver in place and consider what we do in the future. It's still well below the £189,000 statutory threshold, but we need to do something now to see what we do to make sure we don't get into a problem in the future on that. Okay, so that's everything in respect of the information on spend compliance. Do you want me to run through the report in its entirety, or would you prefer to invite questions as we go through each particular section?
Do members have any questions? I've got Judith indicating. Judith.
I just thought it'd be worth passing on our gratitude and congratulations to Children's Services and obviously to Finance. You'd expect Finance to get 99%. That's nice to know. But I do think Children's Services have been under a lot of pressure recently, and that they've achieved 99% is, out of both of them have got absolutely huge budgets, is a considerable credit to them.
Yeah, fair play. I would agree with that, Judith. Richard, do any of these actually, because this is like the figures I'm looking at in May and August on page 101, have we had any sort of non-compliance as a result of COVID at all?
Well, I think in respect to non-compliance from COVID, that's more dealt with in the waivers section.
Yeah.
So what compliance means here, and it's a little bit confusing, is compliance with the transparency code. So that is making sure that we've got our contracts up on the system.
Yeah.
Some of those contracts will have been awarded via a waiver process.
Right, yeah, that's further down, isn't it?
Yeah, so for instance, we've had to put contracts in place for hotels in response to the Everyone In initiative. We've had to purchase PPE from a range of suppliers. So compliance in respect of those percentages is kind of compliance of a small c, and then the compliance of a big C is dealt with in the waiver section, if that makes sense.
So, so just going down to page 7 or 105, then when you're looking at the awards waivers, obviously there are some big figures there. That they would be what we would probably know as the highly public, blindingly obvious things like emergency active travel implementation stuff, things like the Ibis Hotel PPE, those sorts of things which we would understand as councillors have been happening as an emergency response to the government and the COVID crisis then.
Yes. Well, what I've tried to do is split the waivers into 3 sections so I can contrast that to the previous report. And we've still got quite a few which are done in response. So a lot of those are actually small individual orders, as you'll see in the exempt, which are to do with food orders, PPE orders and so forth. There's one significant order which is in relation to the Ibis Hotel, but the rest of them are all relatively small. The one above are the waivers agreed due to a delay, which is where we had tender programs and where we've had to reallocate resource, and where suppliers have been stretched, we've had to effectively extend some contracts outside of scope. There's been a lot less of those this time round because we dealt with those initially, and they're predominantly within social care, and we're working with social care now to get those tender programs back up together. And then the one above is the business as usual direct awards, and that has been skewed by a direct award which we've done for our waste contract. I can go into a level of detail on that because in pursuant to that waiver, we issued out a contract award notice in the official journal of European Union, which said to the market, essentially, we're going to be awarding a contract to our incumbent provider for waste collection. Predominantly the reasons being is we're waiting for consultation on environment bill, we're piloting food waste collections, we're looking at the materials recycling facility. So there's quite a few things there that are going to make it very difficult for us to go out and procure effectively, because there's a lot of fluidity in what the service specification is going to look like. And if you go out and procure that wrong and seek to change it partway through a contract, it can be very expensive. So that went to Gateway Board, was approved. We had detailed market testing with our incumbent and their competitors who were all fine with this approach and actually welcomed us doing the waiver and coming to the market when we had more certainty, so they'd be able to put better bids in. And as I said, that's been out in the official journal of the European Union and has been for a 30-day challenge period without any problems. But that essentially is what has skewed that number significantly up to the £8.9 million there. The rest of them are all relatively low.
Judith?
Thank you, Chair. I think these categorisations that you've put in here are really useful and really relevant, actually. I mean, some of it's about extending existing contracts, some of it's about not being able to tender because of COVID, and then the important line in some ways is waivers in response to the actual emergency itself for COVID-related supplies and services. I think we've probably got quite a good understanding about what those emergency supplies and services would have been. Obviously, it would have been PPE. Can you just list some of the items that it would have been, not going into confidential details, of course? Can't hear you.
Apologies, I've got a controller on my headset and I think I must have sat on it and muted myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Apologies.
Can we have that in the council chamber, please?
Good idea.
Okay, so sorry about that. Yes, so we've had to continue purchasing PPE. That constitutes still a relatively large spend, but not as much as it was previously, because we built up a buffer stock, and we're hoping that buffer stock is going to take us through now, probably towards the end of the year. And we're also hoping that central government follows through on its PPE portal, which, if all that goes smoothly, it will mean that we will be able to direct providers to that portal, not have to get so involved, and not have to spend directly, because where we're spending at the moment, we're then having that recompense to us, as I'm sure the committee is aware, via the central government assistance. So PPE still falls into that area. Food, but less so now. When the pandemic first hit, obviously a number of shielded individuals were unable to get hold of internet shopping and things like that, so we had to get much more involved. The reliance has gone down a lot. The supply has leveled off. You can purchase toilet rolls again now, and pasta and various other things, which
you could be a bit premature with that comment.
Yes,
yeah.
We're already putting rations for that now.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make sure that we keep the supply lines in place just in case. But there is still a requirement for us to purchase those things. In respect to the Everyone In initiative, we had to extend the IBIS contract, and moving forward, there's going to be still some waivers that will be required from the Everyone In initiative, because as a council we're seeking to help with that issue, irrespective. But we've managed to find routes through where we can access things like the housing network, which we can do compliantly. So we're not going to see a lot of significant waiver spend that I foresee in those areas. IT spend has gone down quite a lot in respect of hardware, but I think there is still going to be some spend going forward to help get the infrastructure where it needs to be quickly. But again, I think that's going to be relatively low spend compared to where we were previously. Okay, I think they are the key areas.
Thanks.
Members, any other questions? Second question. Sorry.
I think this is a good report, and the fact we've also had some additional information to look at has been very, very useful.
Thank you. Chair, I was only going to say, and thanks to Richard, we did ask him for some raw information, and he certainly supplied that. I did feel it was a bit like looking for a sort of needle in a haystack in terms of trying to sort of discern whether there were some problematic examples in there. Clearly, we're reliant on Richard bringing them to our attention if there is. So, Richard, I mean, like I say, I couldn't discern anything in there which sort of rang alarm bells as such. If there was something that you felt needed to be drawn to our attention, then clearly it would be worth us going and having a look at that. But if I'm reliant on your report, I suppose, which, like Judith has said, appears to summarise well what the situation is. Doesn't alert us to there being any particular sort of red signals, if you like. Are you able to confirm that, Richard?
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Ferret. Essentially, I've given you my analysis within the report, which we've just been through. What I wanted to do, though, is make sure that you had the detail underneath that as well, which I felt was appropriate for this type of committee. If you're happy for me to continue doing that, we'll continue providing that information. So hopefully you have confidence in my summary, but again, I want to make sure you have the same information that I do. What we seek to do going forward as well is you've got a summary of the waivers. We are getting our procurement admin back up to where it needs to be, and we are effectively going out to recruit into some positions to that effect. So what I'm hoping to do for the next committee is to actually provide you with that level of detail on the waivers as well, so that you'll be able to actually see the content of those waivers rather than just the general gist of what they are about and values and terms and so forth, if that would be useful to you.
Yep, that'd be great.
I mean, I also like your table on page 108, page 10, about the KPI performance. I'm really glad to see that added into your report, because so often it's just all about procurement and not about contract management.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Do you want me to move on to the KPIs section on the report, or was there any further questions?
Please do, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. So the KPIs, we don't have any red KPIs, but the concern that I have, which I've outlined within the report, is that we don't have the KPIs being completed by the services. So a key focus that we've put on since the last report is to get visibility of the contracts, which is our starting point, is to get the contracts on the system. And then the next focus that we're going to have is to get the KPI performance completed by the services, and to start scrutinising if we've got contracts there that services are saying aren't suitable for KPIs. Are they really not suitable for KPIs or necessary? So there's going to be a bit of work that we're going to do to review that, get the KPI information up to date, but also review how we're asking for those KPIs and make sure we're doing it in a relevant and proportionate manner. I think there's some work that we can do to simplify how we ask for the KPI information, and I think there's some work that we can do to focus the KPI performance more proportionately determined by the sort of risk associated with the contract and the values and so forth. So that's a piece of work that I'll be looking to address, and hopefully provide you with some improvements in respect to performance when we come back. Okay, so
Judith.
I mean, while we're on the subject of KPIs, I hope that quite a number of them are KPIs related to outcomes, actually outcomes for people who are receiving the service and what the service is actually about, and also KPIs that are to do with value for money in relation to outcomes. I don't think there's much use in outcomes that just say this number of people attended this number of sessions, or this number of people were, it's not about counting inputs. In other words, it must be about impact on outcomes. And I know it'll take a while to get to that. And some of it will be to do with customer satisfaction. And I think it'll take you a bit of a time to get there on some of our contracts, but I would urge you to go that direction.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I mean, it's not going to be covered so much in the information on those KPIs within this report, because that is essentially top level KPIs, which covers all types of contracts. But through the work that I do on the procurement gateway board, where any contract above £1 million comes to us, and below that in procurement, any contract above 100k also comes through to us as well. We're seeing a move, particularly in social care, to move towards measures and outcome-based reporting. It's not wholesale. It will take time to move to that, and it will require suppliers moving to that way of working as well. But yeah, I think from what I've seen of the systems thinking interventions which have happened in social care commissioning, we are now starting to see, as contracts are being retendered, that the KPI measures are now being reviewed, and we're getting that much more kind of partnership working and inclusion of the end user in terms of what is important for them, and monitoring that we retain over time. We don't just check what's important for them at day one. We keep those checks on.
Richard, I'm just looking at the table. There's one that perhaps slightly bothers me, which is the KPI never scored, which suggests to me that there were KPIs in place for those contracts, and there's it's a big old number beside it, that the work was never done to actually check the contract against the KPIs that were put in place, which would suggest to me that it's sort of a bit basic, that should have been done and wasn't. Is that the case?
Yes, to be frank, Councillor Bosher, I think it is the case. So I wouldn't say it necessarily reflects that the contracts haven't been managed, but it means that people haven't updated the system. So we're going to need to spend some time and resource to go out to those contract managers and ask them to update the system so that we can get the information across the contracts.
So it's the contract managers that set the KPIs for the contracts they're managing.
Yes.
And then they're not updating the system with the KPIs that they put in place themselves in the first place.
Essentially, on the system, we have a broad set of free KPIs that sets against contract service level, business process, and end user perception. So the ethos on those free KPIs is that any contract should broadly fit within those free KPIs. Personally, I think it might be a little bit too complicating. Probably get by just with one KPI, to be honest, but that's something we're going to look into. But essentially, underneath that, each contract will have its own set of KPIs depending on the type of contract it is. So a social care contract will have quite different KPIs to a construction contract, but broadly they should all be able to be translated into those three. So what we need to do is go out to the contract managers and say, against those contracts, with your translation from your contract specific KPIs, we need you to update the corporate KPIs so we can bring that into the report.
Yeah, just harping on that one a little bit. If you take something like an adult social care contract, where it is a lot about the service that we're actually providing, not necessarily the value for money type aspect of it, there will be a set of KPIs that are being put in place by the contract manager. How would you judge the contract then if they came to do a renewal or something similar? If they haven't completed the KPIs on a particular contract with a particular company, how can you judge therefore whether that company has done a good job in delivering the contract before you go down the way of them letting them tender for another contract? Because you don't.
I think in response to that question, we have the procurement governance, which requires any contract of a lifetime value above £100,000. When it's coming up for extension, that needs to go through procurement. It needs to be signed off by the relevant service director, and it needs to be signed off by legal. And part of that is completion of the extension form, and that asks all about how the contractor has been performing. And that's where we request to see if the KPIs have been complete. And largely, the KPIs have been completed, but unfortunately, they're not always translated onto the system. We do have some instances where extensions come forward and the KPI information has been lacking. And one of the key things that we state going forward is that we want to see more information before we approve it, and we certainly then want to see that the KPI management is properly resourced and dealt with during the extension period. So we do have that check there, and we do ask as part of the extension as to whether the intent KPIs are being completed. Unfortunately, the intent KPIs aren't always being completed, but on the whole, when those extensions come to us, we are finding the contract management KPIs are being completed.
I mean, on the whole, the contract will require that the provider reports back on the KPIs, and indeed going back even further, the KPIs will be an integral part of any invitation to tender and eventually the contract upon which a tender is won. So it goes back much further, and it may not be the contract manager who actually, partly because of the turnover of staff and partly because of it's a different job, it may not be the contract manager who actually designed the contract, and sometimes you get a mismatch there. So I'm sure, Richard, I feel confident that you're looking at the whole chain and trying to make it more, to make it better.
John, do you have any questions?
No, I mean, you raised the point on the not scoring KPIs, Chair, and that's, to me, that's been a perennial issue on this committee, probably ever since I've been on it, and I'm still astonished that contract managers are able just to proceed on the basis that they don't have to do them or they don't feel inclined to. So I would hope that at some point we're going to, you know, get some best practice in place, and people are going to be completing them as a matter of course. But I'm sure you report this back, Richard. But certainly something needs to be done in order to make sure that people are doing this as a priority, rather than feeling it's something that they can do if they feel like it.
Yeah, so unfortunately we did lose some of our contract management oversight resource in procurement. An officer left the department. Prior to that, they'd also been covering multiple roles. We are currently out to recruit more of a contract management KPI specialist. So one of the key things that person will do once appointed, which we're hoping will be very soon, will be to assist me in overhauling the kind of KPI system and checking to understand, are people actually managing the contracts irrespective of the KPI being updating? And if they are managing the contracts, what is the barrier to them completing this simple KPI on the system so that we can provide that insurance?
Judith.
Can you explain to us why 12.8% of the value of contracts is a KPI expired? I can't imagine many times when you have a KPI that didn't last the length of the contract, or if you were renewing, you would renew the KPI. What's the reason for that figure?
The definition of expired KPI, as it states, the schedule is in place and at least one KPI score has been recorded, but there hasn't been a KPI scored in the last 12 months. So this would be...
So it's the KPI report that's expired, not the actual existence of the KPI.
Yeah, so the contract is still running, but the KPI information that we have is running off of a report that was done some time ago. So it's around that confidence. If a contract is running for 3 years, but the last time the KPIs, so that's...
You explain it in the key. So it's really another one for chasing up people up, isn't it?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
It sounds like it's about systems management as much as anything else, and getting people to dot the I's and cross the T's as much as anything, doesn't it? Okay. Members, any more questions? Do either of you have any questions that require us to go into exempt session on the other reports?
No.
No? In which case, I think, thank you very much, Richard. I think it's just a noting report, isn't it? So I think personally, I think it's a very good report, very challenging, asked some good questions. I think it's been very well presented as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Okay, members, I think that's the last item on the agenda. So with that, I think we can declare the meeting closed at 20 to 4. That must be a pretty good record for a governance and audit meeting, Nikki.
It
Thank you very much for chairing, and everybody else for their report.
And let's hope Leo sorted out his domestic.
Well, if we can get this done in